What's up? Welcome to another episode of Bitches Love Sports. If you're new, that's what BLS stands for. Um, I'm your host, Jazz Monet, and I, man, technical difficulties, I swear. And I know some of y'all aren't tripping, but I be trying to start on time. So I say that to say, thank you for showing up. We're gonna do our best, and by we, I mean me and my guest that's gonna be joining me here in a few minutes, hopefully. Um, Sorry for being late, even though it was just a few minutes. And yeah, we have a few things to talk about, and I'm gonna start off with shout outs and call outs. Man, this is getting off swimmingly. I almost want to like just turn the intro on and start over if I'm being honest. One thing I will say is this though. If you follow me on Twitter, I do this thing sometimes that's like the good morning post where I try to like send a motivational message or something. And so this is kind of on brand for me. And when I have days like today where I'm dealing with like a lot of technical difficulties and it feels like it's like tough going live. What's up, Martin? Glad to see you. But yeah, like this shit starts happening. Sometimes I start to get kind of, I don't want to say upset, but like, if you've been watching for a while, there was a time that we were at Dawa Studios. And so things were relatively easy there because it was like, okay, you show up, the lights are set up, cameras are set up. All I had to do was like log into my StreamYard and we were ready to go, and there just wasn't a lot to do on my part. And even though we would start late, I didn't have to deal with the technical difficulty. So it was just kind of like whenever we started, and then we had this amazing file for the podcast that had great sound, great video, great lighting, everything. And so sometimes, like on days like today, I'm just like, man, it sucks that we're not there anymore. And why did XYZ have to happen? But then I kind of have to sit and remind myself, like, yo, I'm doing like three times the content weekly now that I did when I was there. And so on one hand, it's like, yeah, I miss being in the studio. But on the other hand, it's like, okay, eventually at some point, I was going to end up here where I wanted to have a more regular schedule and put out more content. Um, and so just thinking about it from that perspective, it's like, yeah, sometimes a loss isn't necessarily a loss. Sometimes it's just like pushing you to that point that you said you wanted to get to. Like sometimes getting to that point means having to leave a situation that you thought was great, or having to leave behind a person that you thought would be around forever, or having to like let go of some aspect of what you do that you were like, yeah, all I have to do is grow from here. And then life is like, no, actually, I'm gonna take you and put you in a whole different situation. And so it's just like when you when you get in those moments where you start like regretting certain decisions, just try not to think of those situations as so much of a loss. Look for the opportunities, look for the ways that you've grown, and just try to keep moving forward. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but just that's the best way to look at it, especially in situations like this one where there's nothing that you can do. Sometimes there's just nothing that you can do, and so it's just like you either find the good and you find the opportunities, or yeah, you're just gonna be like sad and regretful the rest of your life, right? Hey JV, what's up? Glad to have you guys here. It looks like somebody even left a comment before I got started about Randy Gregory being a 49er. So we can start there because my take on that is pretty simple. I don't really care. I saw the news and I'm just like, okay. To me, the way the Broncos let go of Randy Gregory was just like full of red flags. I'm just like, on a random Wednesday, who lets out news that this dude is about to be cut? And then apparently he wasn't actually cut, like he wasn't officially cut. So I don't know what's going on there, but I don't want any parts of it. I don't see him as a threat to the Cowboys. I don't think he knows anything, especially about how the team is being like is operating this year. I don't think, yeah, I'm just not worried about it. I'm not worried about Randy Gregory. So yeah. So on that note though, let's get into the actual shout outs and call outs that I had planned to talk about today. So starting with the WNBA finals. So this is a shout out to both the Las Vegas Aces and the New York Liberty. So there were a lot of people who before the season even started predicted that it would be these two teams in the WNBA finals. Um, and the reason why is because these two teams both made a lot of moves in the offseason that set them up to be what was considered super teams. And so when people just looked at the rosters, everybody was like, okay, well, clearly those two teams are going to end up in the finals. Because one of the great things, I guess it's great or terrible depending on how you look at it, but one of the things about like a new sport or a new sports league is that a lot of times how the matchups go is a little bit more predictable than sports and leagues that have been around for a long time, like American football, like soccer, like baseball. And it's because anytime a new sport or a new league starts up, sometimes it takes a little bit of time for people to adjust to the learning curve. It takes a little bit of time for all the teams to get like high quality coaches and high quality trainers and things of that nature. Um, God of God says Cowboys better get those red zone issues solved. Are actually going to talk about that. I got to stop this habit of like looking at y'all while I'm trying to talk though. So I'm gonna work on that. Anyway, yeah, so in a new league, it's a little bit easier to predict based on things like a roster or past one loss record who's going to be successful. It's a lot easier than it is with a sport that's been around for a longer time, like the NFL. So when they started making these moves, a lot of people were like, "Oh, we can't wait to see them play each other in the regular season, and we can't wait to see how the playoffs go." And so a lot of people predicted correctly. And there are some people who are a little bit annoyed, a little bit upset by that being the case, kind of like, well, if we can tell just by who has the most stacked super team who's going to end up in the playoffs, like what's the point? Or who's going to end up in the finals, what's the point? But Kelsey Plum, who's on the Las Vegas Aces, she's a guard for the Las Vegas Aces, actually had an interesting take on that. And I'm going to read her quote to you. She said, "Brick by brick, it's taken time. So when people talk about super teams, it's hard for me to acknowledge because there were years that we weren't super. Those of us who are homegrown players, every year we've seen the growth. And the thing about sports is a lot has to go right. We had the pieces, but it's about putting them in order." So she's acknowledging two things there. One, she's acknowledging the fact that, like, yo, just because we're a super team here in 2023, there was a lot that had to go into putting us in a position to be a super team. And then on top of that, just because someone has a stacked roster and they have a super team, if you don't have the other places in order, then things might not go as well as you think they might go. And when it comes to the Aces, they've actually invested a lot in their team. They've got $1 million coach. They invested in new facilities dedicated to the women's basketball team in Las Vegas, which a lot of WNBA teams do not have, right? So you can tell they've invested. You can tell they've been intentional about setting up this team for success. And it sounds like Kelsey Plum is saying, hey, don't just write us into the finals because we're a super team, or don't just think that that made it easy. Like, there was a lot of work over the years and a lot of work going into this year that went into making sure that this investment wasn't squandered. Like, yeah, it's not that hard to get free agents onto a championship level team in the WNBA, but that doesn't mean it's easy to get to the finals or win a championship. She is what she's saying. So, taking it from someone who's as high level of a competitor as Kelsey Plum, I'm going to take her word for it and believe that because everything that she's saying makes sense. And then the other thing from my perspective is that, to me, the way these teams were assembled is just a testament to the WNBA as a whole, because it's what they felt like they needed to do to win. So if you look at the Aces already had Asia Wilson, they already had Kelsey Plum, and then you have Candace Parker, who was on a really good team already, who says, you know what, I'm going to leave the Sky and I'm going to come join the Aces, right? So she saw something there that was worth her leaving a team that she said she'd be with for a while. And also the Aces were like, you know what, we could use someone like Candace Parker. So they could have very easily been like, oh, well, we've got what it takes to win. As a matter of fact, we did it before. But it's something about the way the talent in this league is growing and developing to where they felt like, hey, this is something that's going to be necessary in order for us to repeat this whole championship thing. Same thing with the Liberty. They already had Sabrina Ionescu, and then they went to the playoffs last year. So once again, we're seeing that track record of success. We're seeing a star player on the roster already. And then they added Jonquel Jones. And after that addition, people were like, whoa, the Liberty are going to be tough to beat. Then a couple weeks later, they go a step further and they add Brianna Stewart and Courtney Vandersloot. And then that was when they started hearing the super team rhetoric. You know what I'm saying? But once again, it's like, okay, clearly for a team to make these moves and make these investments, they must be looking at the WNBA and saying, hey, this is what we need in order to beat the other teams, in order to make it to the playoffs, in order to get to the finals. So I take it as a sign that the WNBA is growing, talent is developing. And then on top of that, you've got the news of a new expansion team in the WNBA. So yeah, there's a lot happening in terms of progress for the WNBA, and I'm excited to see where it goes. And so I hope that seeing these teams in the finals doesn't make people think like, oh, the rosters that are stacked are automatically going. I'm hoping what happens is that other WNBA front offices look at this situation and start thinking, okay, what can we do to attract better talent? What can we do to develop our talent? What ways can we invest into our team that we haven't already? I hope it inspires players to be like, okay, what do I need to level up my game? What do I need to do to attract more star players to come and want to play with me, to come and want to play with us? Those are the things that I want people thinking about whenever they see the situation, because those are the kinds of thoughts that are going to lead to growth for the WNBA. So shout out to those two teams, shout out to the WNBA, so on and so forth. Um, Next is SimoneBiles. So I was gonna pull up a video, and I might. I don't think I'm gonna be talking about this for a long time, but we'll see. But yeah, so SimoneBiles, she, if you're not aware, ended up taking some time away from gymnastics for mental health. And it was a criticized move at the time, because there were some people who didn't think that she was actually having mental health issues. And there were some people who thought that it was quote unquote soft. But it started this whole movement of athletes being open and honest about their mental health issues and about the things that they experience being a competitive athlete, and the sacrifices that they have to make, and the different ways that they have to deny themselves, and some of the self talk that happens that, and habits actually, that quite frankly aren't healthy. And so I'll always respect her for leading the way when it comes to that. But now, at the World Championships, she's taken that to another level. And I'm going off memory again here. I forgot to tell you guys, no show notes. But yeah, so she goes to the World Championships, and she's supposed to perform the Yurchenko double pike on vault. I'm pretty sure that's the name of it. I think I got that right. So anyway, she goes out there to perform it, and one of the things that not a lot of people talked about was the fact that she had her coach as a spotter there. Now, that's controversial for a couple of reasons. One, it's one of those things that's kind of like, okay, you're a world champion, you've got so many medals, yada yada yada. Like, it kind of, I don't want to say takes away from her professionalism, but it's just one of those things that people are like, like why would someone who's on her level need to do that, Which I'm just like, okay, if she had mental health issues and she was also dealing with the spins, maybe there's part of her that just feels safer with her coach there to spot her. So the criticism, I don't totally understand. But also, there's a half-point deduction for her doing that. So whatever reason she felt she needed to do that, it was worth her taking, being docked half a point. And that might not sound a lot if you're used to sports where like half a point is not even a thing. But in gymnastics, like literally the difference between gold and silver can literally come down to half a point. So that's the risk that she was taking. But the difficulty of the move gave her like an extra point in difficulty, assuming that it was executed properly. And so she basically bet on herself, took that risk, and decided to have her coach spot her. And so I respect that, just because I think there needs to be more examples of people breaking the status quo, especially in terms of doing things that help them, that support their mental health, that make them feel more comfortable, that make them feel more safe. Sometimes I think people take things like safety and comfort for granted when they're observing athletes. And then I think that there are some people in the world who just don't consider the humanity of athletes enough and consider the importance of things like safety and comfort. So for her to go out there and say, yes, I feel like I need my coach here to spot me. I'm not going to be shy about it. I'm not going to worry about people's criticism of it. I'm not even going to worry about this half point deduction. I want to go out there and be my best. And this is something that I need to be my best. And I know what I need. So I'm going to do what I need to do in order to be my best. And I think that's beautiful. She's been a pioneer for not only gymnastics, but women's athletes on so many levels. And this is yet another way that she's, just gone above and beyond in setting an example. And I definitely respect it. And I hope more people follow that example. Now, don't be mad at me. I haven't been keeping track of the medals that they've won at the World Championships. I think I heard something about the Team USA winning something and her winning something, a sixth or seventh medal in something. Just know they're doing well. Like I always say, being a bitch who loves sports is exhausting. I only have so many hours in a day to absorb so much information. And if I could have found an article that just listed in bullet points, here's what they're doing, here's what they won. I would be happy to report it to you guys. But when I tell y'all, all the reporting on this event was just all over the place because it's in a different time zone and it was just unclear like what event was happening, if the event was over. So I will say this to the people who cover women's gymnastics. Yo, can you make this shit easier to get updates on? Like it's just ridiculous that I'm just like sitting there for like 20 minutes trying to figure out like, okay, so are they going for a sixth medal or did they win a sixth medal? And the team is going for this medal, and SimoneBiles is also up for other medals. Like, yo, somebody just make a spreadsheet, lay it out, like, please. One major beef that I have with like women's sports coverage is that it's like when we say we want more people to be fans, you can't make it like doing homework. We can't be like, yeah, we want more people to support women's sports and then make it hard for people to keep up with what the hell is going on, even when they really, really want to. So please do whatever you can. If you're watching, do whatever you can in your power to make it easier on people like me. So that way I can convey the news to people who are watching this video because I mean my videos don't get like a ton of views. Like I'm not like up in the, five figures and shit. But I feel like, you start with a few people, get them interested, but I can't really start with a few people if y'all make it like hard to just get basic information like who won what and what is happening next. Just those two things. Can we just make that a little easier? Thank you in advance. All right, so on those notes, I think that's actually all the shout outs and call outs that I had. I was supposed to be joined today by a guest, and they said they'd be here by 4. They're not here yet. Hold on, let me just check and see if they've like messaged me just in case. No. So yeah. So I'm just gonna talk about these topics by myself until they show up, doing what I normally do. So I always talk about the Cowboys on Sunday morning when I'm doing the Buffaloes recap anyway. So I'm gonna start with the Buffaloes and go from there, and then I am gonna address some of the questions that I've already seen pop up about the Cowboys, especially the red zone issues, because I do have thoughts. I have thoughts on the red zone issues, and I also have thoughts on the way people are responding to the red zone issues. So we'll talk about that in a second. But I quickly want to do a preview of Colorado. Now, one thing about this upcoming game against ASU is it's not on national television. So, one, I don't know if I'll be able to watch it. I think I should be. Somebody gave me a cool ass link weeks ago that works for a lot of stuff, but it's hit or miss if I'm being honest. So we'll see. But yeah, so one of the things that was interesting, and I don't watch this show often, but and don't judge me in the comments, but speak on FS1. Um, they were talking about the Buffaloes, and let's just say they do a much better talking about college teams than they do about the Cowboys. And if I'm being honest, I wasn't even watching the show. I was on another website. And I don't know if you've ever been to like a website where they have the article and at the top they have a video. So it's like it was a video at the top. And it was, I think it was Acho actually talking about the Buffaloes. And he said something along the lines of, this is a statement game in the sense that it'll give the Buffaloes an opportunity to show who they are when nobody's watching. And that is an interesting way to think about this game, especially considering some of the comments that CoachPrime made earlier in the season. One specifically that I remember, this was actually after the Oregon game, where he said, there were 9 million people watching, and that's what y'all chose to show them. And so now we don't have things like that as, like leverage or as a talking point. It's just them against the Sun Devils, and it's going to be on Fubo, I think. But yeah, there's not a huge audience. Now, if I'm being honest, I don't expect it. I don't expect them to be that affected by it. But I do think it's an interesting way to think of it, especially if we do see a different type of team show up. Because after the USC game, we kind of talked about, okay, how will they respond to what happened during this game? So if you didn't see the Colorado versus USC game, what essentially happened, and this is like very general terms, but they came out to yet another slow start, as they often do. And for a while, it just looked like they were going to get whooped by USC. The only thing that gave me hope was that they scored a lot earlier in that game than they did against Oregon, right? And then it seemed like after halftime, there was just some sort of transformation in the team. Like they came out with more vigor, more determination, like a renewed sense of purpose, something. And we also saw a breakout performance by OmarionMiller. So there was just they looked like a completely different team in the second half. And so there are a lot of people after that game who said, okay, so is this what we're going to see from them moving forward? Like, are they going to be able to start games like this? Did they kind of learn from this experience? And can they take what they've learned and actually do this for 4 quarters? Or are we going to see them backslide? Like, are they going to go up against a non ranked opponent and kind of forget everything that they learned because the same emotions aren't there or because they're expecting to win or whatever? And so I think if they do come out against ASU and they do well, then I think people that whole narrative about like, oh, the spotlight is getting to them and they're distracted by yada yada yada, I kind of expect that to come up. And the main reason that I'm mentioning it is because I do expect them to win this game. And if they do win this game, and it's a game that's not on national television and they don't have as many celebrities on the sidelines, I do kind of expect people to be like, oh, well, clearly during other games they've been distracted and that's why they had the slow starts and so on and so forth. Um, and I have a hard time believing that simply being on national television or having a few celebrities on the sidelines is enough to explain things like slow starts or things like being blown out against Oregon. Um, and especially whenever you hear some of the things that are mentioned, whenever even without listening to some of the things that are mentioned, like just watching the game, like an offensive line doesn't become that bad just because The Rock is on the sideline. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna take a second and read some of y'all's comments. JV said, "I watch on Fire Stick. You can get Fubo content on Fire Stick. Like, send me some information about that. Um, I can X you during the game if you like." That is so weird. That I still cannot get down with it being called X. But please do. If I'm able to watch the game, I'll be making posts about whether or not I'm able to watch the game and whatnot. So let me know. Um, but I do also think I have a Fire Stick around here somewhere, so that might also be an option. So appreciate you, JB. But yeah, so no, I do not think that the national media being present is a big part of the issue, and I don't think that that the national media not being present is going to turn them into a completely different team. What I do think will turn them into a completely different team is a couple of the things that I've seen on Well Off Media this week. And so, like I've said before, I'm very big on team culture. I'm very big on like watching certain things and seeing how different dynamics change throughout a season and how that affects a team. And one thing that I noticed this week is that there wasn't a lot of just a lot of talk from Coach Prime. So if you think about earlier in the season, the whole it's personal thing came from a speech that Coach Prime gave to the team. And this week, I noticed it was Dylan Edwards who was addressing the team on a recent video, and he used the phrase "it's pivotal." So things like that kind of make me feel like kind of how last week we talked about the team didn't have an identity or was still in the process of developing an identity, and in a lot of ways they were still very immature as a team. Things like that send the message to me that that basically they're maturing, that they are figuring out their identity, and that they are figuring out an identity that works for them, that wasn't given to them by Coach Prime, that wasn't given to them by some marketing strategy. They're figuring out who they are for themselves, and that's a really big deal. Um, and one of the things that I think has contributed to that is just seeing performances from people like Omarion in this last game. During the post game press conference, Shedeur talked about the fact that he talked to Omarion during training camp about stepping up this year and not having a regular freshman season. And something else that I need to look into. There are some sources that say OmarionMiller um, is a true freshman, and then there are some that are like, no, he's actually a junior. So if anybody has any information on that, pass that my way. Because once again, lots of transfers. I'm not keeping up with 100% of everything. I just go with reputable sources, and the reputable sources have conflicting information. So Martin, I don't know if you have your detective hat on right now, but if you have any info on that, much appreciated. But yeah, so I think seeing performances like that, regardless of what year he's in, OmarionMiller caught his first collegiate pass during that USC game, and so it wasn't like he just caught his first pass and it went on the stat sheet, and then he just kind of started working his way up from there. He caught his first pass, and then the rest of the game was a breakout game that I think people are still going to be talking about even once the season is over. Martin says he's a freshman. Is he a true freshman though? I think somebody said he spent a couple years, made. I think they maybe said at Jackson State, but I feel like I would have remembered him if he was at Jackson State. But then again, if he never caught a pass, maybe not. So that's the part that I'm looking for. But yeah, I think when the rest of the team sees that, and if you watch any of the content from Well Off Media, you can tell it was like a big deal. It wasn't one of those things that like, oh, fans are excited about this, but for the team, okay, so he is a true freshman. Cool. I need to go back to that thread and kind of clarify some things because somebody was like, "No, he's a junior," and I'm like, that does not sound right. Too many sources have said he's a true freshman. So yeah, appreciate that. And if you have a link to where you found that, send that over. Um, but yeah, I think seeing performances like that can inspire a team. Watching the content from Well Off Media, you can see how everyone was excited about it, not just that day, but also throughout the week. And so I do think things like that can make a difference in terms of inspiring other members of a team to want to step up, to want to also have impactful moments, to kind of challenge themselves and say, okay, what can I do different? What can I do better? Um, Now, as far as this matchup specifically, when we get into the on field stuff, I don't really have a lot of reasons to think that Colorado won't win this game. And that's why I'm just like, yeah, I expect them to win. So on the Colorado side, we've seen them have great performances against some high performing teams. Oregon not among them, but even some of the unranked teams that they played against kind of threw some things at them that made the game, less than a walk in a park. So we've seen them, especially in the second half of games, step up, show more aggressiveness. We've seen Shedeur show a variety of styles of quarterbacking. We've seen him stay in the pocket. We've seen him roll out of the pocket. We've seen him play the quick game. We've seen him use his own feet. And I feel like when it comes to him having so many facets to his style of play, that specifically is one of the things that I think that ASU is going to have trouble with. Because whenever you look at the game against USC, I think one of the reasons that that game was closer than a lot of people expected it to be was because of the fact that uh, that the score was sorry. One of the reasons that that game was closer than people expected it to be was because USC actually made a lot of mistakes. Um, they had a lot of penalties that just kind of helped ASU stay in the game. But the thing that kept USC on top at the end of the day, I think, was the quarterback play of Caleb Williams. Now, that's not to say that Shedeur Sanders is Caleb Williams or anything like that, but I think in the sense of throwing out different things, like kind of getting used to how the defense is going to play him and then being able to adjust, I do think that is one of Shedeur's strengths. So that's one of the areas where I think that they have a leg up. Also, ASU seemed to kind of rely on a lot of trick plays and things like that. And while, if you've heard me talk in the past, I don't think a lot of Colorado's defense. But one thing that I will say is that the ways that they usually get beat is in terms of teams that are bigger than them, and therefore are able to come with just a little bit more force and a little bit more aggressiveness. Um, your classification carry over if you can't change it. Oh, Martin, are you saying that he's a true freshman because that classification carried over? But yeah, so when it comes to the Colorado defense being beat, a lot of it I think had to do with them facing teams that were like literally bigger than them and more experienced. But I think a lot of the things that ASU uses to try to trick a defense, I don't think those kinds of things are going to be as effective against Colorado as a lot of people think that they're going to be. As a matter of fact, I think it could get them in a little trouble. So just from seeing how ASU has played against other high level opponents, I do expect them to put up a fight. I do expect it to be, maybe a little bit back and forth. But I also think that Colorado did genuinely learn a lot from the game against USC, not only about what other teams might throw at them, but I think they learned a lot about themselves. And I just have a feeling that that's going to be the last time that they're going to want to hear anybody talk about them having a slow start. So, yeah, I have ASU. I have Colorado winning, and we'll see what happens tomorrow, and then I'll be back to talk about it on Sunday. Either way, hopefully, having actually watched the game. Okay, I'm checking my messages one more time. Um, yeah, so it looks like my guest might join us in a few minutes. They're a teacher, and they had an emergency. I can't really be mad at that. So I'm gonna save some of the other Colorado topics for whenever they get here. Okay, so Martin says he was never a transfer. He just committed to Colorado. Okay. Well then I'm like you. I have no idea what this other person was talking about who said that he was a junior, or why you'd even make that an argument if you don't have evidence to kind of support that, because they never even like posted a link to where they got it from. They were just like, no, he's a junior. He was from Jackson State. And I was just kind of like, all right, if you say so, but apparently that's inaccurate. So I'm gonna go with what all the other reputable sources said that I found on Google and say he's a true freshman and he crushed it. But yeah, I mean, that makes the story even more impressive because, like, I think whenever it comes to the mental component of that game, now, if there's one group of people who I say could possibly be affected by the national media attention and things of that nature, it might be true freshmen, because that would be a much bigger gap between where they came from and where they end up, as opposed to other athletes who were at least already on a collegiate campus somewhere. So to me, that makes it even more impressive. And yeah, like I said, from watching the content that was on Well Off, not only him, but Cormani's performance as well, it does look like the rest of the team has been inspired and like they're really ready to show up and challenge themselves to play 4 quarters of actual good football. And if they can do that on Saturday, I think it's really going to set the tone for the rest of the season. There are some people who are expecting them to lose on Saturday. And honestly, I'm not sure why, because even when they struggled with a slow start, I would never say they looked like a team that couldn't. They've beaten every other unranked opponent, for one thing. And that's what ASU is. They're another unranked opponent. And yeah, I just haven't seen anything from them that says their struggles would be so bad that they would end up losing this game. I think they've got enough talented players, and I think if you watch some of the strategies that they've been trying to employ over the last couple of weeks to overcome some of these higher ranked opponents, I think if they continue on that trajectory, I'm not gonna say that they were there, but I think if they continue on that trajectory, like they'll definitely be, easily bowl eligible by the end of the season, which is what a lot of people expect. I also heard a rumor that the Peach Bowl is already asking for them to be a participant, so that's a whole nother question. Martin says he was committed to LSU at one point, but Prime flipped him to Colorado. Interesting, interesting. Stuff like that explains why coaches don't like Coach Prime. And I'm not saying that that's a good reason, because like at this point with the transfer portal and everything, that's just part of the game. Um, but just sometimes when you hear certain things and it's like, well, why would a coach say that if it weren't true? I think you have to kind of look at it from that perspective of just the impact that Coach Prime is having on college football, things like this, where he's taking players that have committed to other schools. And I think there was also a time um, where that was just considered really taboo. And there's something about Coach Prime. I don't know if it's something that he's saying to them or what, but there's something about him that's got these players like, we don't care if it is or not. We're going to where we want to go. So it looks like my buddy has joined. Before we switch to the Cowboys content, we're still in Colorado. So I'm going to bring on Mr. Dom White. How are you doing?
Man, I'm gonna just jump into it. I heard you. I heard you. I was backstage and I heard you. First of all, I gotta say, you remind me of the type of sister that Jason Mraz talked about. I don't know if y'all Mraz fans. I'm a Mraz fan. Jason Mraz got this part in the song where he says, You're the type of girl who can, break it down but build it back up. Sister, you got it all. You so versatile, as Outcast tells us. So I've heard you. I heard you in the background. Something about Coach Prime. The thing that I love about Coach Prime, he got me wanting to take my fictional son to Colorado. I got three girls. Y'all see it? Y'all see it right here? I got three little girls. They'll never play for the Colorado program as far as football is concerned. They'll never play for a Coach Prime. But the fictional son that I have, I would surely want to give him into the hands of Coach Prime because he's got that old school approach, that old school rearing, where it's almost like a conservative type background that us as a culture can actually attach ourselves to, especially when we have the grandparents that may have raised us with those old school values. He instills that into his guys. Whenever he talks about my kids, it just feels different. It sounds different.
Yes,
There's a different approach to it. It seems like as if he means it. Is he without his scars as a coach? No. We all have them. He's a human. So you might hear about a little story here or there about, a deaf player on that team or the guys that were previously at Colorado that ended up leaving the program because of the change that happened with Coach Prime. So he's not without fault here. He's not without, finding some dark areas there. But overall, it takes that kind of thing to be able to push a program forward. For him to do what he's
agreed.
done in such a short amount of time at Colorado, to now have the national attention, not just on, getting the clicks, as the Oregon coach Lanning said, but it's really about instilling a belief in those kids, a whole
Exactly.
identity inside of that program. So I am a Prime fan. Prime as a man, Prime as the guy that mentored kids in inner cities, Prime that was in the youth programs, but also the Prime that you hear from even his friends. Like, I'm pretty sure you may have talked about the Michael Irvin interview on
Yeah, we talked
Fox
about
last
that
week.
last week.
Man, that's the type of stuff that we need to see. We need to see more about the human side of these men. So shouts out to Coach Prime and what he's doing for that Colorado program, because in the next year or two, it's going to be pretty scary.
Yeah, and everything that you're saying is stuff that I mentioned when there was that whole controversy between, him and Lanning from
Hmm.
Oregon. Because I felt like to say that, they're doing XYZ for clicks was kind of cheapening what he was actually doing. And I
Right,
was like, well, no, for one thing, he's trying to recruit even better players to Colorado. Like he said himself, he needs eight more dogs, right?
right.
And so the team is doing better than it was last year, but it's not at that level to where you're going to recruit the top players in the nation unless they're coming for something else. Like something else has to attract them, right?
Right.
Otherwise, they just go to a higher performing team. So I think one, he's, like basically launched a very complex recruitment campaign where he's showing people aspects of the lifestyle of being part of that team that they might find appealing, which he knows because if you look into his past, he's always
Mm,
been about fraternizing with celebrities,
right.
getting the endorsements, being flashy. He literally had a song called Must Be the Money. So it's like this isn't new. Like we know who Prime is. He's still that same dude. He's just a little bit older, missing a couple of toes. That's it. Um, but not only that, I do believe like if you take into consideration just the short amount of time that this roster has been together and what they're having to do in terms of instilling a new culture, because like team culture is important, team cohesiveness is important. To me, what it looks like is that he was just like, okay, the skills are going to come. We're going to have to do what we can do to help them develop as athletes, both physically and from a knowledge perspective, like knowing how to play their position, understanding what they're looking at on the other side of the field from competition. But in terms of the culture, I think he was like, if we can just instill the right culture, we can get them to work that much harder. And there's so many things that whenever it comes to leveling up quickly, just start with self belief. I never saw arrogance in these guys. I saw
Mm,
him trying to teach young dudes how to
right,
be confident, how
right,
to be proud of themselves, and just
right.
say, like, okay, you don't need a bunch of wins. You don't need a championship to feel good about yourselves. You can feel good about yourself right now, and then just create a future that matches how you feel about yourself today. And I'm just like, I feel like to hate that, like there's got to be something wrong with you. I feel like to look at him doing something so special and have a problem with that and try to tear him down and spread rumors and make him look bad. I'm just like, how miserable of a person do you have to be to like look at him doing work like that with young men and be like, I can't stand it. I hate it. I don't like it. I'm gonna talk bad about it. It's crazy to me.
Yeah, it's a thin line. It's a thin line between many things. There's a thin line between being confident and being prideful, and the type of prideful that we know we don't really need, where you might boast, your head might be in the clouds, you might think highly of yourself when you shouldn't, you may not be considerate of others, you're just a me-centric person. That doesn't seem to be Coach Prime to me. It doesn't
No.
seem the kind of like message that he's given to his players, because when you start to build things out in context, he is talking about them as individuals and their growth and the type of men they'll become, the type of fathers they need to be, what life is ultimately about. But when you're talking about just building a football program, then you have to consider the wins columns, because, hey, at the end of the day, it is sports, it is a program, there is a job on the line. So he's going to have to consider that other side of things. So the confidence that he has to put into his players by the both like the bold statements that he's making, I'm all for that. And even to go back to Coach Lanning from Oregon, what he said to me was fair game behind closed doors with his players. You do things to get guys fired up. It was a cool little quote in my mind. All right, cool. And I think the
Right.
media kind of spun it, and he kind of just stayed on it, even in that halftime interview about we're not finished. Okay, I get all that. Whatever. So maybe it's
See,
been
I
blown
looked at
out.
that situation a little bit differently
You did.
because to me, yeah, like I agree. Had it stayed behind closed doors, okay, say what you got to say to get your team fired up. But me knowing that he invited the cameras in there, to me that said
Yeah,
he wanted that message to be public.
I
And
got
so
you.
that was the problem that I had.
I
I'm just like,
stand on
no,
that.
it
Yeah,
wasn't the media ran with it. It's like
you know
you
what
gave
you're
it to
doing.
them and told them to
You know
run,
what you're
you
doing.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But let's talk more about what they're doing on the field because I feel
Mhm.
like we've seen several versions of this team, and I think some people are wondering what version of this team is going to show up against ASU. And on paper, I don't know about you, but I expect them to win this matchup against ASU. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't. One, they've beaten all the unranked opponents that they've faced so far this season. Two, when you look at the team that showed up, especially in the second half of the USC game, they sound like they're committed to showing up as that same team and trying to do it for 4 quarters. So I definitely believe if we don't see that specific team for 4 quarters, we're definitely going to see a faster start than what we've seen in the past. Just the way that they felt after that game, getting so close and not being able to pull off the win, that would have been such an upset. It just seemed like they were more determined than ever to not let that happen again. But it's just like if you go back to the TCU game, for example, first game of the season, I remember watching that game and feeling like their offensive line was just amazing. They were giving him all kinds of time in the pocket, even to the point where he would roll out of the pocket and the pocket was just still there. Like they're just like, he's no longer here, but we're just gonna hold this formation. And then after that, it was almost like, where did those guys go? Because they just weren't protecting him the same way. Did you see anything that kind of answers the questions of what exactly happened with the Colorado offensive line?
Number one, TCU, tad bit overrated. That's why I've always told people for preseason rankings, that's for dollars and that's for viewership. And so they put those preseason rankings into place. So as you create these matchups, and now we're trying to televise games, who are you going to really watch? So now you have this storyline. Then when it comes to Colorado, the big story was what is Coach Prime going to do in his first year? So eyes were already on Colorado. Then TCU, you had the preseason ranking, them coming off the national championship run. They had a magical season last year. They lost quite a bit off of that team. So to me, there was always going to be questions about TCU. I didn't think that they would be a team that would even challenge for the Big 12 championship. It seemed to be Texas and Oklahoma once again, and maybe a surprise team like a Kansas State could be able to sneak into that third spot or so. So you had the showdown. So I think it's a little bit of the overrating of TCU. But then when you get into that second and the third game, second game being in Nebraska, Nebraska, they're now trying to rebuild. To me, the Colorado situation reminds me of Matt Rule when he was with Baylor, as Baylor's coming out of what felt like a dead period for them because of all the infractions from all of the scandal that happened under the Art Browse era. And you get Matt Rule, who goes to Baylor, wins one game the first year, then he wins six, I think, the second year, and then by the third year, he's winning 11 games and playing in the Sugar Bowl against a Georgia team that just outmatched Baylor from a player talent perspective. But you go from one win to 11 wins within a 3-year span. That's spectacular. And so I thought for Coach Prime, it would be the same thing. Like, it's going to be a slow, gradual turnover of the program. And here we are, boom. He's beating Matt Rule, the guy who put the blueprint out on how to build a program. And you're feeling good. But the whole time in those first two games, you could tell as Prime makes a comment like you stated, where he just needs 8 more dogs or 8 more horses. It ain't on the outside. It's not the athletes. It's on the interior. It's in the trenches,
Yes,
both on the
yes,
offensive line and on the defensive line. It's simply girth that they're missing.
yes.
So I'll give you an example. A big time program like the University of Texas. What has been their
Mhm.
problem since the Colt McCoy era of 2009, and even before that, Vince Young? It's the guys up front, like just the overall talent, but the size of those guys. And so to think
Mhm.
like a program like UT has only had 2 or 3 linemen in the last 15 years drafted in the NFL, that's a problem. And they got all of the money, all of the ability to scout and bring guys in, and they couldn't do it. They're now starting to do it, and you're starting to see that program turn. Colorado, you don't have the name yet. You weren't there even when Prime was able to get there. He's having to go into the portal to be able to fix things, to like patch it up now. But now that they're having a success, now that people know that Prime is the real deal as a coach, and he's put a great staff around him with NFL experience, this is a place where this ain't gimmicks. This isn't a freak show. This ain't the circus. This is a real deal, big time program as they then go to enter into the Big 12. So start looking out for Colorado. So now this is a place where a family would want to send their young man to turn into a man because of the kind of coaching staff that they have. But then this is a place where you're going to go and develop as a player, because these guys are having dreams and aspirations to make it to the next level. So Colorado, they're getting the pieces together, but for them to have that ultimate success, to be competing where they can get into the top 15 and be there consistently, maybe making it to the top 10, make some true noise in the Big 12 as a legitimate contender, it's going to have to be in the trenches.
I agree. And against USC, I do think we saw them protect Shedeur a little bit better, kind of like Coach Prime promised. You know, he was like, y'all are gonna be impressed with how protected Shedeur is. I wouldn't go that far.
Mhm.
Unless by impressed he means like as compared to the previous game. Oh yeah, like that was like an improvement, but I'm just like, yo, like he still needs a lot of help.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see how that situation develops as the season goes on and over the next couple years, because it sounds like Prime's ultimate plan isn't about this season.
Mhm.
It's about like really building this program and taking his time and building it. So I think some of the
Foundation.
other
Yeah, it's the
yes.
foundation year. Next year, framework. Just take steal from the construction business or home building. It takes time, takes different levels. By year 3, now we just picking out interior design type stuff. So, so for him, it's going to be a slow process. It's going to be year after year. They've just kind of sped that foundational thing up a little bit faster because of all of what they've been able to get from the media. But people are starting to see this is the real deal. But let me switch it up and let me turn host just real briefly. And I don't have the skill like you got the skill. But did you see the report put out today about Shedeur Sanders by an anonymous coach in the Pac-12?
I'm not even calling that a report. I am not going to dignify that rumor by
Yeah,
calling it a report, because I'm just like,
it's
first of
crazy.
all, who would say that? I was like,
Oh, you got some salty people who would say it.
I know, but I'm just like Colorado right now in the conference is ranked third from the bottom. So I'm just like, do ASU and Stanford care that much to like throw salt on their name, or is there somebody who's above them who is just that salty to where they would make up such ridiculous rumors? I'm just like, even just thinking about the coordination it would take to do something like that from a logistical perspective, because like Shedeur can't decide by himself to just take sacks. Like
Right.
I think if people were like, "Hey, there's open targets," and you're letting yourself get sacked, or if like the whole O line would have to be in on it, it just doesn't make any sense. It
Yeah,
doesn't make
take
any sense.
sacks to pad the passer rating or the accuracy stat. That don't make sense.
Yeah, and not to mention the danger associated with
Right.
taking sacks like that. Like I
Don't
can't
fall
imagine
for it.
in a scenario where it would be worth the risk, especially considering that Shador has decided to not go to the league
Right.
this year. I'm just like, what would even be the payoff? To me, that sounded like a statement from someone who is jealous of
Very
Shador's
much so.
stats, and they're trying to put a blemish on his record. Because like without that being, true, the biggest blemish on his record is the sacks that he's taken, which can't be attributed to him. And I find it a little bit coincidental that in one of his recent press conferences, Coach Prime said something along the lines of, "Oh well, look at his stats and yada yada yada," and then he's
Well,
like, "And he's doing that, and he's one of the most sacked quarterbacks in the conference. Imagine if we could fix that issue." And I just find it interesting that Coach Prime makes a statement like that, and then all
right.
of a sudden this rumor comes out from an
Right.
anonymous source that like, oh yeah, this quarterback is being sacked on purpose. It's so ridiculous. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah. And the only reason I wanted to bring that up is because it goes back to the negative stuff that's out there and how asinine that stuff can be. It's like you got to take it with a grain of salt itself and be wise enough as a viewer, as a person that wants to digest this stuff. Like, come on, just go and do your own little research. Just have a little bit of common sense and just think about these things yourself. Would a quarterback really take sacks to expose themselves, as you say, to potential injury just to make sure they don't throw an incomplete pass?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the downsides though of like the clickbait era. I think there was a time where having some sort of source, some sort of substantial support for a claim like
Mhm.
that would have been rewarded.
Right.
But now, even if something like that is not true, if it's something that can just get people talking, it'll be posted, it'll turn into an article, it'll be shared. And so it's just unfortunate that people will, justify those rumors. Like I saw one retweet and I did comment on the retweet, but it was one of those things that's like, I'm not sharing this. This is so ridiculous.
Right.
Um, but going back to some of their like on the field development. So one thing that I will say about the team, the last time that they were facing unranked opponents and they were winning, they had Travis Hunter. Now it sounds like Coach Prime is planning to keep Hunter out until after the bye week. What do you think about that decision? Like after seeing them against USC, do you think that they have what it takes to go out there and get the job done against ASU, against Stanford without Travis Hunter? Or do you think that Coach Prime might be, just setting a little bit too hard of a boundary there?
No, to me, this is where you do have to protect your player. And we have the quotes that came out where immediately after their first loss, Travis is texting coach wanting to perform the very next week against the USC team. And Prime has to, put him in his place to be able to protect
Yeah.
him for him to get that ultimate healing because he is their most valuable piece outside of his son, Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback. So I think you do what exactly the coach is doing right now. You protect the player from himself, you let him get healthy, and you do think about that kid's future because I think they have enough there in place to be able to beat a team like Arizona State. I don't think it's going to be a runaway type victory like you saw against Nebraska. I don't know if it's going to be as theatrical as it was against TCU, but I feel like it might, or even Colorado State, but it may feel like one of those situations where you get the lead, you kind of comfortably have it, they might Arizona State step up because they played a similarly tough game against USC, just like we saw Colorado do. So you got two teams that are prideful and wanting to get and feel that success and taste that victory. But right now, I think you go ahead, you let him get that rest, make sure he's healthy, and bring him back for the stretch down the road.
Yeah, and I do agree in that sense. When I think about it, I still don't think that they're going to have a problem with ASU. And ASU's game
So,
against USC is actually something that we were talking about shortly before you joined us in the studio. And I was thinking about a couple of things that I do want to hear your thoughts on when it comes to
mhm.
this matchup. So, for one thing, one of the things that I think like really kept ASU in the game was USC's penalties, which we have seen Colorado themselves struggle with penalties. But it just seemed like Caleb Williams, being Superman, he was able to overcome in spite of the mistakes they made and in spite of the penalties. Now, even though I don't think Shedeur Sanders is Caleb Williams, like I think he's a couple of steps behind, but I do think in terms of what Caleb is able to do, where he'll come out there and his style of leading the offense is less predictable. You don't know if it's going to be one play for 75 yards or if he's going to march down the field for 11 plays. You never know when he's going to rely on his skill players or take the ball and run it himself, go quick game, sit in the pocket. You don't know. And so, even though I feel like Shedeur has a little bit of development to do to be considered on the same level of Caleb Williams, I do think that he brings that same versatility that's already proven to be a problem for ASU. And I feel like when it comes to the offense getting points on the bar, I can't talk. When it comes to the Colorado offense getting points on the board, I think that's going to be one of the things that really helps them out. Like ASU, they Arizona State can put up a good fight. They can. We've seen them do it over and over again.
Right.
But I just think whatever they try to do, like basically, if they try to play Colorado the way they played USC and think they have what it takes to win, I do think that Shadeur's versatility is going to be the thing that kind of thwarts that whole plan.
Yeah, it's the it's the overall weapons that Colorado have for Shedeur to be able to, get the rock out. And it's interesting, like every single week, there's a new leading receiver for Colorado, a
Yes.
new guy that's emerging. You're like, okay, I thought it was Xavier Cooper
Yeah,
this time.
it was Weaver and then it was
Xavier
Horn.
Weaver. Then it's like, oh, wait, okay, who's that? Oh, got it. Hunter, you're out, but it's every week. So they got 4 to 5 receivers deep
Yes.
who are actually producing for this team. And, the steal from the Cowboys at one point, we used to hear about having a Dak friendly wide receiver room where you could spread the rock around and just distribute that and not feel like you have to force feed one guy. Well, this is actually reality for Colorado. And these aren't just another guy, average guys out there. They're actually extremely good athletes
Yes.
that he's able to get the ball to. So my concern, if I'm an Arizona State Sun Devil fan, is how are we going to put up points to be able to match Colorado's firepower on offense? We know that Colorado's weakness or area of refinement is on the defensive side because they have allowed 90 points in the last 2 games on defense. We know that their offensive line isn't the strongest, but when you got Shedeur back there getting the ball out of his hands, creating, having the poise that he has to be able to stand there in the pocket, or even when he maneuvers, he's not scared to take the hit or even take a sack. He's trying to wait to the last second to get his guys open. He's literally working through progressions where I don't see my
Yes.
first guy, second guy, bam, I'm hitting my third guy. Or first, second, I don't see it. Let me move to be able to add some time where my guys can create and get open. He's doing it all from a quarterback perspective. To be this young in the game, 3 years into his college career, he's doing things that a savvy NFL pro would do. So if I'm a Sun Devils fan, I'm just wondering, how am I going to stop the Colorado offense? But then my offense itself, even against a defense like Colorado, how are they really going to score points? Because that's been a huge issue for them. And even though they put up, 28, I think it was,
28.
against USC,
But a
USC's
lot of people
defense.
don't think much of USC's defense either.
Exactly. So they're a bend but don't break defense, and unfortunately, they've been breaking a lot. And so, shout out to my guy Eddie O, who's a USC Trojan fan. That guy, he just lets me know everything about USC. And right now, nobody's confident in the Trojan land when it comes to that defense.
Oh, yikes. Yeah, we might have to revisit that one of these days whenever I'm covering another USC game, which normally I would. It's just been a hectic week. So I was
Hmm.
like, Colorado Cowboys. That's all I got time for.
That's it.
Before I talk about the Colorado defense and what they may or may not do in this game, I do want to circle back to what you just said about Shedeur, because I think that's another thing that definitely negates quote unquote reports like what we heard today.
Right.
Because I'm just thinking to myself, a quarterback who's trying to protect his completion percentage and is willing to take a sack to do it does not throw that pass to
No.
Amarion Miller in the end zone on 4th and 5. Like,
Right.
he just doesn't do that. That would have been the time to like be like, okay, send out the field goal unit, let me take this sack, and oh, we tried just something. That was a risky play.
Right.
And it didn't exactly unfold quickly. Like, he had to look for an opportunity, and there was not one but two risks during that pass. There was someone right in front of him who tried to jump the path of the ball,
Yep.
and then there was a defender that was really right on top of Omarion Miller. That, had they made one different move, they could have broken up the pass, intercepted the ball maybe. And
Right.
so what I see is a guy who's trying really hard to win, and if anything, he's taking sometimes more time than he should with his progressions and checkdowns, and that's what's making him susceptible to being sacked. I don't see someone who's like, oh, I'd rather get sacked than, deal with an incompletion. That is just crazy.
Yep.
Um, but going to the Colorado defense, so something else about ASU that I noticed when they were playing USC was that, well, I mean, for one thing, they ended up on their third string quarterback. So it was like, do with that information what you
Right.
will. But it also seemed like they kind of resorted to a couple of trick plays here and there to, keep the offensive momentum. Um, and I'm just not sure that those kinds of things will work the same way against the Colorado defense. I feel like usually when the Colorado defense gets beat or they have trouble, it's kind of like what you said. It a lot of times
Right.
has to do with like size and in some cases experience, right? Because
Mhm.
they're not used to playing with each other, and some of them are almost all of them are new to this level of football, right? And so between those two things, that usually seems to be what gets them in a little bit of trouble. I don't think trick plays will really do it the way, it kind of worked against USC a little bit. Which is kind of odd to say, but that's just how I feel. As one of those This is one of those times where it's like, unfortunately, I'm a little bit susceptible to the eye test, but that's just how I feel. Do you have
Yeah.
any thoughts on that?
So also the whole time during the USC game, I just kept thinking, come on, Colorado. Why would you allow yourself to get down that early? Because you have the environment working to your advantage. Like, you can
Yes.
bring teams, like, slowly bring them deep into the water, because that altitude, it will get you.
Yes.
Like, man, there was a couple of years ago. I love Colorado. That's my spot. Denver. Shouts out to Denver, Winter Park, Breckenridge. That's my place. Like, that's my happy place. So I'm up there trying to work out because I'm like, man, I'm down here. I ran 5 miles straight. I got it. I got up there for 1 minute. Done. Done. And it's like, man. So the whole time I just kept saying, just hold off. Come on, come on, come on. But they weren't able to, show up in that first half. And all of a sudden it flips. In the second half, you start to see their offense stay out on the field a little bit longer. You start to see the USC defense wear down, and you see the stamina of the Colorado team, though they're the smaller team. So in a performance going up against an Arizona State who don't quite have the talent as USC, their size isn't as large as a USC team. Now you're starting to see Colorado play against a team that's similar to their program in a sense, but I think Colorado has more horses. They have more athletes in this
Agreed.
showdown, so they definitely should walk out of this game with a victory. It's going to be a big blow to the development of the program if they don't pull it out, because you do need to see them stack some wins and don't play
Yes.
down to the competition. Continue to play up like you did against TCU, Nebraska, and let that second half against USC.
Yeah, agreed. And some people say like not to read too much into what players say in interviews. And
Right.
I understand why you wouldn't, but when I hear everybody repeating the same thing, I can't help but feel like on some level that message is hitting home and it's going to impact how they show up on the field.
Right.
And I just heard too many of them say, not only in the post game press conferences after the USC game, but also in the midweek press conferences
Hmm.
and some of the things that they've just been recorded as saying via the well off media content, the videos that are coming out through there, where it just seems like they are so ready to put it together for 4 quarters and
Right.
to say, like, hey, that team that you saw in the last half of the USC game, we can be that team for 4 quarters and we're going to prove it. It really just feels like whatever they're doing at practice this week, that is one of the messages that is being driven home. I'm gonna go to a couple of comments that I've gotten here.
Oh,
Carlton joined us and says Oregon threw a trick play or two against Colorado, including a fake punt. That's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that. Thanks for bringing that up, Carlton. And he adds, Colorado wins, but needs to be careful. ASU has nothing to lose.
right.
Good point. Expect the
Yep.
unexpected.
Yep.
Yeah, they have nothing to lose, and I do think that they're better than people give them credit for
Oh
because
yeah.
they are unranked. And you just see the fight that they put up against these really good teams. So
Right.
I think I'll say this: they have what it takes to beat Colorado. I think they
Right.
do. I just don't think it will. I think
Okay.
whenever it comes down to it, I trust Shedeur to step up. And I trust the team to come together and that culture that we talked about earlier that Coach Prime is building. I just feel like that's what's going to that, and also obviously what we just said about athleticism. I think those are going to be the things that give them enough of an edge to just outlast ASU and ultimately get the W.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And then
Two
I think
two
they'll
great
carry that
points.
momentum over to Stanford. Like, I don't see them losing again before the bye week.
Oh no.
As a matter of fact, I'm really just looking forward to, like, okay, Oregon State. Let's see how much we learn by the time we get to Oregon State. That's what I'm excited about.
Right. Yeah, we definitely should see a Colorado team pull off the next 2 wins, but you got to play the game. You can't look at it on paper.
Facts.
So
Facts.
those are two great points in those comments.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I'm an hour into the show, so let's touch on the Cowboys stuff. We won't go too deep into it because I always do another Cowboys preview. So like on Sunday mornings,
Mhm.
I do a Colorado recap and then a Cowboys
Yeah.
preview. So I'll talk about it more then. But I just somebody put it in the comments earlier. They were talking about the Cowboys red zone issues, and so I have comments on that.
Hmm.
And my biggest thing about it is I'm trying to figure out how to state this respectfully because I don't want to talk as though red zone efficiency does not matter. But I just feel like people are worried about it more than they should be. And I think that worrying is happening mainly because it's the narrative right now. I don't know if you were in the space. By the way, I didn't, introduce Dom the right way, and I don't have the headlines up.
Uh,
Sorry, guys. I told y'all those are up there. But Dom is with Pick Six Sports, and they do a couple of podcasts every week. And Nick's hosts some awesome spaces throughout
yes,
every week. Like he is the Twitter space king. And so there
sure
was a
is.
space recently where the subject of red zone efficiency came up,
Right.
and one of the things that I said was, who was a team that was really bad in the red zone last season? We don't really know because they weren't really talking about it. Numbers don't lie, but they can be manipulated. And these talking
Mm,
heads will pick out whatever numbers support their point, and they'll use those numbers to make it sound like they're right. That's what they do. So when it comes to red zone efficiency being like this super huge issue, like, don't get me wrong, we want the Cowboys to be better in the red zone.
true.
But I just feel like when I hear Dak Prescott say things like, oh yeah, Shotty told me and CD that if we were going to score, it would have to happen outside the red zone. To me, what that is saying is that the coaching staff is aware of who this team is, what they're good at, what they're still developing in, and they have a plan to get the job done in spite of that. And so it's like I think at least one of the touchdowns that we saw in the red zone was a running one, and I know the pass to CD was outside the red zone, and I'm not looking at the
Right.
box score to remember
No,
like
you're right.
every single other scoring play
You're
that
right.
happened. But I'm just like, okay, we're finding ways to get the job done despite that. And so
Hmm.
I'm just like, if you just want to be aware of what your team is just for the sake of being able to speak intelligently about who the Cowboys are and what they're good at, cool. But as far as like working yourself up into a frenzy, like if we don't figure out red zone efficiency, the season is over. I don't think so because we've seen them win in spite of that. We've seen them win well in spite of that.
Right.
So I'm just like, why are we freaking out?
Right. So to me, yeah, of course it's a concern. Of course it's an issue. It's a blemish on what they've been able to accomplish this year. But then whenever you flip it and find solace in what you're seeing the Cowboys be able to do, they've had 19 trips into the red zone. That's more than all other 30 teams in the NFL because they're tied with the Buffalo Bills. So tied for first. At this point this year, that 19 is almost double the amount of red zone trips that they had last year from an offense that was ranking number one. So they're getting to the area of the field that you want to get to in order to produce points to be able to pull out wins. Yes, you want them to go ahead and finish the deal. So that's something that they need to work on. But for me, I ultimately think it's like a relationship. Have you ever been in a relationship where you're dating somebody in the beginning? It's all great. Everything is great. And then they just don't develop. They don't really turn out to be what you truly need. And in the end, it all fizzles out because you start to see the big issues with that person and you just know this ain't going to work. For Dallas, it's like that right now in a sense where it's a little bit opposite of that, where you don't want them to be firing on all cylinders at the beginning of the year. We've seen Dallas do that in the past. And then when it's time for the playoffs where it matters, they've already had their best days in the regular season. Right now, Dallas still isn't firing on all cylinders, which they don't have a full mill deal with their offensive line. They've had to have three guys come in and plug in. They've had two guys come in and start who are depth pieces. Looks like maybe this Sunday, we're probably going to touch base on that in a little bit, where they'll have their full offensive line. So right now, it's kind of like a slow burn, a slow churn. You don't really see a Cowboys team that's firing off on all cylinders just yet. But I actually find solace in that because, yes, they can improve. There's areas of refinement. But I'm looking up at the situation in Dallas right now.
Me too. And here's the other thing that bothers me about the red zone conversation. It is painted as a Dak Prescott issue. The media obsession with Dak Prescott is
Lord.
unhealthy. It really is. Because when you try to provide context for that,
Oh,
nobody wants to hear it. And I'm like, nah, if
no.
we're gonna talk about Dak Prescott, let's talk about Dak Prescott. Let's not just talk about what you want to talk about. Let's talk about who he really is as a quarterback.
Right.
And he is a quarterback who has dropped some absolute dimes,
Big
sometimes
time.
literally into the hands of these tight ends, and then they drop them. But nobody wants to talk about that when they're talking
Yep.
about red zone efficiency. Not
Nope.
only that, I think it's also affecting skill players and how they're getting to the spots where they're supposed to be. Because one thing that I've noticed is that when it comes to what they're doing in between the 20s, everybody's like, oh, they're clicking on all cylinders in between the 20s. And I think the reason for that is you've got things going on at different levels. And so there are options, and people kind of know where they're supposed to be in terms of depth or distance away from the quarterback. But whenever you're in an area that's a little bit more compressed,
Right.
it's just people are having trouble. Sometimes people are having trouble getting open. You've
Right.
seen the tight ends, as I just mentioned, not respond well to being covered well. And so I think it's just making everything a little bit harder. And Mike McCarthy has to figure out, like, okay, we can't take these same concepts and just compress them. That's not working. So what is going to work? And we've also seen them a couple of times try some run plays. On one of them, Tony Pollard literally ran into Dak Prescott. I don't know what the hell that's all about. But one thing that I will say about Tony Pollard and Deuce Vaughn, and this is something that's worse with Deuce Vaughn, I think because he's newer.
Right.
And I don't know why people haven't talked about this, but it's like I'll just use Deuce as an example because
Mhm.
somebody was like, okay, we should use Deuce in the red zone because he can hide behind somebody and then da 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 da. Deuce Vaughn is smart enough to see the holes, but if you watch when he's his most elusive, when he's most agile, he needs a lot of space. He's a small dude, but when
Right.
he's making those changes in direction, he's taking big strides.
Right.
And you can kind of tell, even when they are in between the 20s, sometimes as he's like going to the outside, what he's looking for is a hole that's big enough for him to take one of those big strides. So he hasn't really gotten the hang of using like short, choppy steps getting through smaller holes yet. Now, when he does figure that out, and I think he will because he seems like a smart kid, I think
Right.
he'll figure it out. he's going to be dangerous. And
Right.
at that point, by all means, like use him in the red zone. But until he does, all that's going to happen is he's just going to like keep getting stuffed because like there's not enough time for him to find a hole big enough for him to do what he does best. So I just, and I don't know. That's one of those things that is like, do with that information what you will, because I feel like Tony is the same way. Tony is really good at making people miss, and just in those compressed areas, there's just not as much room to make people miss. And so it's not that I'm trying to make that an excuse for anybody. I'm just once again trying to provide a little bit of context for why this team, this offense, is doing so well in between the 20s. All of a sudden gets into the red zone, and it's like, oh, we're struggling. There's just some things that they have to figure out.
Right. It seems as if every other quarterback you can bring context, but whenever you try to do that with Dak, then it's excuses. The real deal is the offensive line has been an issue down in the red zone.
This is
And
also
it's
facts.
mostly about the communication along the offensive line because you have one missed assignment every single time they get down in the red zone. And that one thing can absolutely kill a play, especially when you start to think about penalties. When you get a holding call inside of the red zone, you have almost completely ruined that whole drive, and you're probably going to have to settle for a field goal. So we've had three holding penalties right there in the red zone that just killed it. Now we have to offer up a field goal. Then you have the miscommunication of between the quarterback and the running back. It seemed to be more Pollard as Dak, checks, and it's the play that you're talking about. He runs right into Dak. That hole was open. It was as wide
Yeah.
as can be. In the NFL, of course, it closes quickly, but he could
Yes.
have punched that in for a score. I think the other problem was the play calling, and Mike McCarthy didn't just do some coach speak. He actually meant that. Like, I have to be a better play caller in the
Yes.
red zone. I actually have to change things up. But he gave the context, not excuse, of, well, we had three offensive linemen who were two of them were starting for the first time in the NFL, and we had a third one that's a depth piece that had to step in. So he was too conservative. The other problem that I'm starting to see is let CD actually play on the outside as a receiver in the red zone. Give him some shot on the
Yes.
outside because often what we're seeing is teams are allowing Dallas's outside receiver to go one on one. Well, let Lamb get that one on one.
Yes.
Instead, you're starting to see Michael Gallup as the one on one guy. And that's no shade to Gallup, but we know that he's kind of a two route type guy. Give him the fade, give him the slant. Well, if you're not going to go to the intermediate or deep passes inside of the red zone, then you're going to have to do some short, quick things. Why is it always, operating like that? So go a little bit more risky, be a little bit more daring. But that is the opposite of what everybody has been saying over the offseason about less turnovers, less risky. Well, you can't get too conservative and too safe. We've seen Mike McCarthy do that. And it's very predictable. They've been doing the
Hmm.
run, run, pass pattern too often. So change it up. Maybe do some play action where they have been the most play action team in the league, but that's in between the 20s. Well, bring some of that again to the red zone. Play action first play, and then actually throw the ball or do a little bit of more of the fade routes. So they're going to get it together. Now we're hearing the offensive line is coming back. You're going to have your pieces start to work on the outside. Cooks is starting to come along. Gallup is looking like the Gallup of old. These last two
Yes.
games, he's been shining. Tolbert has kind of had his day in the sun, even. Great special teams play where he makes a big tackle. You need your wide receiver four to do some of that. And then he pulled out, what, 5 receptions for 62 yards, moved the sticks 3 times. You need a
Hmm.
possessions receiver like that. Things are starting to slowly churn and come together and click for Dallas, but can you get the communication situation settled and can you put them in the right play calls to be successful?
Well, hopefully this Sunday communication will not be an issue getting that starting five back in front of Dak Prescott. I'm really looking forward to seeing what that offense looks like with our starting offensive linemen in place. I'm going to go to a couple of more comments. Martin said they're not talking about Dak's interception this year. I wonder why. You see how interception is singular? Who has the most interceptions so far this season? I know who it is, but it's like if you only watch the 4 letter networks, the 3 and 4 letter networks, it's like who they're not talking about it. You know why? Because nobody cares about Jimmy Garoppolo.
Man,
Um, he does not get you ratings.
right.
Um,
That's
Carlton
good.
said, and this was a few minutes ago, he said, "You're right, but please take into account the short field the defense is giving them." Yes. Dak and Lamb are still not on the same page after 2 or 3 seasons, and the second receiver hasn't developed in Schultz.
Mm,
Okay. I kind of have thoughts about Dak and Lamb not being on the same page. So CD admitted that last year he said, and I quote, "We were never on the same page." Now he backtracked really quickly and said, "We weren't on the same page as much as we like to be." But I'm sorry, when I hear a professional athlete say something like that, I feel like, nah, you meant what you said the first time.
hmm
So as far as I'm concerned, based on the words of CD, and not only him, you hear like how Jalen Tolbert talked about how confusing he felt the offense was. In my opinion, this is the first season that they've had an offense that's actually set up for them to be on the same page. So I'm not really putting a lot of stock into the whole, well, they were together for 2 and 3 seasons. Because one, let's be real, like there were a lot of games where CD just was not used like his strengths weren't used properly on that offense. And so I feel like as far as learning what CD is best at in terms of those things that Dak can just like rely on him to do automatically, like having the kind of chemistry, for example, where Patrick Mahomes and Kelsey have, where Kelsey literally made up a route and Patrick Mahomes was able to find him still relatively quickly in the end zone. That kind of chemistry, I don't expect Dak and CD to have, like largely due to just what they've dealt with in terms of their offensive coordinator for seasons prior to this one. So I'll give them a little bit of grace in that area.
See, I told
Um,
you. You
too much
you
context.
you broke it down and then you built it back up. That's what you do.
Carlton said it's there. It's not all Dak, but he is learning a new playbook,
He's
and the
right.
Hall of Fame offensive line isn't the same. Facts, facts. Um, and that's another thing. I think a lot of people don't really think about what it takes to learn a new playbook because we have to think about the fact that there are aspects of their playbook that we have not even seen on the field yet. So it's like when you think about the fact that there are levels to learning plays, right? There's seeing it like on paper and conceptually understanding it, and
hmm
then they always have that phase where it's like they're able to like go through the motions and know what their individual roles are. At some point, they get to practice it against other professional players who play defense, but those people aren't going 100. They're not even allowed to hit Dak. So whenever we see a play for the first time on the field, that is our first time seeing it and their first time executing it in a real situation where somebody is really trying to stop them. And so just when you put that into the context of like, okay, how like what goes into learning a playbook, I feel like that's another area where you can kind of I'm not going to use the phrase give them grace again because I feel like people are going to get sick and tired of hearing that from me. But what I will say is like it kind of helps you understand why there are some issues with development and execution, especially at this part of the season.
Yeah.
Um, we'll scroll through a few of those. Pro Fan Talk says, as a former Eagle, I hate the Cowboys. Lowercase on purpose. You know what? I prefer lowercase cowboys over cowgirls because here's my weekly reminder that calling a team cowgirls because you don't like them is misogynistic. But we'll just roll right on past that. We'll coast through that stop sign. But I always appreciate real analysis. Keep it 100 good content. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'm gonna have to check you out.
Eagle.
Martin says I deserve 100% of the credit for MG's resurgence. So before week 3, I went on like this rant in my preview show where I was just like, MG has to step it up. And I just kind of like went off on all the reasons why he needed to step it up and not be like this hidden part of the offense. And then it was like, oh, like this dude is catching passes again. Um, Dak and CD are good now. Not great though. Agreed. Cool guy. What's up, cool guy? I haven't seen you here before. Thanks for joining us. Says they haven't had a full season together, especially with the weak play calling from Kellen Moore. Exactly. Yes, 100% agreed. And Carlton adds Dak misses Dalton Schultz. Oh no, you're one of those. Dak misses Dalton Schultz's safety blanket. I wish Dak would run a little more to keep defenses honest. I agree with 2/3 of your statement, Carlton. I agree that Dak should probably run a little bit more. That was actually going to be my next question to Dom, and maybe my last question for Dom about whether or not we think Dak should and might probably run a little bit more during this game, especially in the end zone, because we've seen him in the end zone, in the red zone. We've seen him have success with that. I do think Dak misses having a safety blanket. I don't know that he misses Dalton Schultz specifically, but I do think, and this was a question that came up on a previous episode where we were talking about who is his safety blanket, who is his favorite target right now. From watching the games, you can't really tell. Like nobody seems to have stepped up and taken on that role of being like, "Yo, Dak, if you need me, I will be here for you. Like whatever you need, whether it's blocking, catching the pass, whatever. We're gonna get it done. I got you." We haven't seen that person show up yet, so I do think he misses that. I won't go as far as saying that he misses Dalton Schultz specifically. um, any thoughts on any of those things, Dom?
I think he's missing a type of receiver. Like,
Mm,
yes, Lamb is your wide receiver one. He's proven that he
yes.
can be that. Last year was the proof. But he's missing a specific profile. To me, I want him to have a smaller guy who's really quick on the inside to really be the guy who can stretch the seams but work the whole inside of a defense. A lot of teams, you want to be able to attack them in the middle because they're trying to protect themselves on the outside and for the big play. And then a lot of teams now have a great defensive line front, but it's the linebacking core across the league that seems to be having a bit of issues. So attacking the back seven, specifically in the middle, is what I would like to see. That's why I've been a big proponent of maybe you look at Las Vegas. Las Vegas, you got a guy on that squad, former Clemson receiver, that is real nifty and shifty, and he's a hard cover. Can we go get a guy like that? Like a Beasley type is what I'm getting to. Like in a draft, this upcoming draft, I'm looking at Lad McConkey from the University of Georgia. Hey, maybe we can get you. So it's somebody who's just nifty, shifty, that can be that guy that moves the chains. Right now, we got guys who kind of fit that same size profile. They're 6'1", 190, 200 pounders. That's all great. But find me the shifty guy who can literally create separation for them to be a safety security blanket type thing for Dak. But when it comes to tight end, I think Jake Ferguson has it. He just needs a little bit more time to just seize it. So give him
Mm.
some patience there. I think he can turn into something for Dallas. Peyton Hendershot has the athletic ability. I don't know if he can completely put it together yet. I think really Jake is your tight end one for Dallas, and you hope that as the season progresses, he can become that guy for Dak.
Agreed. And you and Martin are definitely on the same page when it comes to that Cole Beasley type of wide receiver. I'm gonna read a couple more comments and get us out of here. Carlton said, "You don't think he misses Amari Cooper?" Hmm. That situation is so far removed. I'm trying to think of what that would look like in the context of what we have now. But I mean, conceptually, yes, that solid route runner.
Now, okay,
It seems like you have thoughts, Dom. You go.
well, Amari Cooper is a supreme talent. That trade worked out for Dallas. He came and immediately made them into something because they
Yes.
move off of the spread net Dak friendly thing, and now you have a true number one guy. And then he allowed a guy like um, um, Lamb to be able to work his way into the league as a rookie. The
Yes.
problem with Amari Cooper is a problem that I personally have out of wide receivers, and it's a thing I just cannot shake. If I'm watching a college, high school game, college game, pros, I don't care, semi pro, whatever it is, if I see a player, a receiver, catch a ball, get up slow, make their way to the sideline, limping, or whatever it may be, then they're back in the game and they exit the game like that 4 or 5 times. They don't show up whenever times are getting tough. There's not a like it's like the glazed over look that Cowboys fan or Cowboys players often get when times are tough. Like it's like, come on. I've seen it in Dak. I've seen it back when Zeke was on the team. You saw it just this season in the Arizona game with CeeDeeLamb. It's like, come on, guys, where's the firepower? Get up. Why are you sitting on the bench? I know a lot of that is, TV cameras catching them at inopportune times. I get all of that. But still, with Amari Cooper, you just look at the numbers. Road games, where were you? When it was time for them to rise to occasion to the occasion, where were you? But still, don't get it twisted. I was a Mari fan. I think he would be a great addition to this team right now if they had him, but they don't. So they definitely miss his route running ability because that guy could separate better than most receivers in the entire league.
Yes, you answered that question so well. Sometimes I get questions like that, and I have to remind myself, like, I'm a relatively new Cowboys fan. Like, compared to those of y'all who have been like Cowboys fans for life, I'm like, I have recollection of one season of Amari Cooper. So I'm just like, yeah, conceptually that sounds right, but I'm just like, I personally need a little bit more context to answer. So thank you for being here to fill that question. Um, so okay, I'll show a couple more comments and we'll get out of here because we're over an hour and a half and I need to eat dinner, and get a workout in and all sorts of stuff. So for those of you who have just joined this, it seems like a whole slew of people just joined us in the last 15 minutes. I'm not sure why, but I would definitely appreciate you subscribing, liking this video, and catching the replay, so that you can see the entirety of our conversation, both about the Dallas Cowboys and about the Colorado Buffaloes. Um, but yeah, so Carlton said, I don't think Dak has the accuracy for a small receiver. I disagree. I think the inaccurate Dak trope is another mainstream media myth.
I'm,
Whenever you start looking, huh?
I'll break that down quick.
Yes, go for it.
For 2017 through 2019, 2 year stretch, the stretch that really people were questioning Dak and his accuracy and the ability to throw the ball with a pinpoint accuracy. That same quote, Dak the whole time was actually leading the league in tight window passes. Like a whole new statistic came out by NES who literally tracked how pinpoint accurate a quarterback is by throwing
I
in
remember when
tight
that news came
windows.
out.
And that was Dak who led the league. Now, you might, as a Cowboys fan, as a Dak sympathizer or Dak defender, you might use that and go, oh, look at Dak, man, that boy dotting it. Somewhat, yes. But it also showed you how poor the receivers were in getting separation. So when you track
Yes,
guys out there like Noah Brown, like even Cedric Wilson, who's a big Cowboys, like a guy to push that many fans wanted to see do well. When you're bringing in the James Washingtons of the world, thinking they're really going to step in for a Cooper who leaves the team, Dallas didn't really have the guys. They didn't have the room. This year, it is a bit different. So really, when you look at it overall, Dak's accuracy, his turnover ratio, he has got like numbers that'll put him in the top 10, top 15, 20 all time when it comes to those types of things. So overall accuracy, yeah, it doesn't look like he has the strongest arm, far as arm talent to put up there with like a Josh Allen. He doesn't have a howitzer like that. He doesn't have the Mahomes arm, but he's right there with the other tiers of guys that are trying to get the ball out and get it to their playmakers. There's nothing wrong with Dak's arm. There's nothing wrong with the accuracy. He has everything he needs, especially between the ears, to be able to
yes,
get it done.
yes. And was that you? Do you need to get that? Cool
Kid,
guy agrees with you. He says Dak is very accurate. He made Randall Cobb and Wilson ballers before he went to Miami.
right.
Um, Carlton said thanks to both of you. You're right. He had solid defensive linemen. It's just not the same. Um, Carlton also said respect to you both, King and Queen. Look forward to watching more of you both. Yeah, I mean, if I keep covering college games, maybe Dom will come back. Dom knows a lot about just not only the college, but you watch high school a little bit too, right?
Oh yeah.
So yeah, he follows these athletes on up through the draft and beyond that. Um, so yeah, on that note, Dom, I'll give you the floor to promote where people can find you, also what you're doing later this evening that you do every week, and then we'll get out of here.
Yeah, on the quick, I've always been a guy in the comments like y'all. I still feel like I'm a commenter. I just help carry a conversation. I'm a conversationalist. Jazz, you're truly a content creator because you bring it,
Thank
and
you.
you're very versatile. Like I said, I'm stuck on draft. I'm stuck on high school guys, watching them, knowing those names, see what programs they go to. I watch a slew of college football. If I see a guy kind of jump off the screen, have a few good plays, I literally write them down in a notepad. Then I track them over their years in college, and then it's easy for me to see a guy surface. As an example, last year, Darnell Wright, the right tackle for Tennessee Volunteers, I said he was the number one offensive lineman in that class. Now look at him. Chicago picked him at 10. That kid is a stud. You saw what he was able to do last night and his
Yes.
performance against Washington and their great defensive line. So I feel like I'm more of an offensive line whisperer, finder, like telling people, hey, look for this guy. And then also, of course, defensive line. You can find me at Pick Six Sports every Wednesday, every Friday at 8:30. We go on. My guy Nick's, Spoonie, and Matt O, Professor O, and then also the beautiful one. So we're all together, and we try to bring you Cowboys content. So we'll recap games on Wednesdays, but then Fridays we try to give you the scoop on what to look forward to. Tonight we go on at 8:30. We're talking about San Francisco. We have a person coming in to give us the San Francisco perspective on how they think the game is going to go. And so that's what we try to do. And so at Twitter, you can find me at that handle, Dom W. White. And like I said, Jazz, somebody put king and queen, thanks. Hey, I was literally thinking about that title today about how we call each other kings and queens. I get it. I know. I get it. I got a different perspective on it. I ain't no king,
Hmm.
but you are a queen. And so
Oh, thank
for
you.
you are amazing at what you do. I feel blessed to be in this space with you here. So shouts out to you. And so conversationalist, you the real content creator.
I love having conversations with you. I literally have a whole Twitter folder that's dedicated to your tweets about dudes coming up in the draft. So if y'all are into draft content, for sure, Dom is one to follow. But on that note, thanks for everybody. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. Once again, like, subscribe, catch the replay, and then just come back and join me Sunday morning. I don't know exactly what time, but I'll be doing a recap of the Colorado game, and then we'll talk a little bit more, especially if there are any new developments with the Cowboys, so we can get everybody ready for the 49ers game that night. So, on that note, I'm Bitch 2, and I'm out.